Hi there folks, and welcome to this lesson. So in today's lesson, what I want to do is I want to talk about how to get the most out of your practice. So how many of you guys have been out there and you feel like you've been practicing lots of stuff, but you're not really progressing, and you don't really know why, and why haven't you reached that next level yet? This is a totally normal thing for most drummers to go through, and it's something that I faced a heck of a lot in my own playing. And I was really lucky. I had some fantastic teachers to point me in the right direction on how to get the most out of my playing. So that's what I want to cover today. So in this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to create a full and well-balanced practice session to get the most out of your playing. Now, I was really fortunate over the years to learn from some incredible players, including some guys like Thomas Lang and Benny Greb. With those guys, I did a few master classes. They were group classes as well as one-on-one. And some of the points that these guys made were really good and went in line with what I was taught when I was growing up. In fact, one of the things that Thomas pointed out was when he was younger, he would go into these practice studio spaces where he grew up, and there'd be guys playing for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day in there. And the same guys over the years would just be in there. He'd go in and he'd shed and he'd do all his practice, and he'd hear these same guys in this thing, and they're all really practicing lots and lots. But the main problem that he heard was that they were all practicing the same stuff. They were all doing the same stuff. And what I mean, like, not each room was doing the same stuff. Like, those guys were doing the same stuff over and over for years. They hadn't actually moved on and progressed to anything different. They were just playing the same stuff. And Thomas referred to this as noodling. So that is not practice. That is not going to get you where you want to go. Now, one teacher that I had in particular, his name's Ryan Menezes, he explained this to me early on, and basically it was like a visualization thing. So on this side, I want you to pretend that there's a stack of things you can't do. On this side, this is all the stuff you can't do. And if you look up, you will never see the top of this stack. Now, on this side is the stuff that you can do. And it may look small right now, but we're going to work on that. We're going to try and get that bigger. Now, the idea is when you're practicing something is you come in and you grab something from the pile of stuff you can't do, you pull it out and you go, and you work on it, and it sounds crappy. And then eventually, when you can do it, you can put it on this pile over here. So therefore, you've added to the pile of stuff that you can do, and that pile is going to grow. But if you come into your practice session and you go, oh, I need to practice something, and you reach over to the pile of stuff you can do and you pull it out and you go, oh, I like this one, I want to work on this, and you practice, and you're giving yourself pats on the back and I'm so good, and you're cheering yourself, and you put that back, your pile has got no growth. It hasn't gone up at all, it's at the same size. So therefore you are, to put it in Thomas's words, noodling, and you are not going to progress. Therefore this pile of stuff that you can do will not be growing. So what you need to do is have a really clear focus on stuff that you need to work on. Now, this is much easier with a teacher. So if you've got a teacher who's helping you along this road, they're more inclined to point you in the direction that you may or may not want to go, but they're going to be able to help you a heck of a lot more than if you do it on your own or just from watching YouTube videos. And I'm not knocking YouTube videos because I'm doing a YouTube video on it, but stuff is always a lot better when you've got someone in your corner pushing you in the right direction. It's really going to make a massive difference. But in saying that, so my practice routine that I had then was something that hopefully would cover all the bases. So essentially with my practice routine, there were two halves. There was the exercise-based practice routine, and then on the other half, there was creating and learning and exploring. So if any of you have ever played sports before, whether it be AFL football, American football, soccer, basketball, anything, and you play for a team, then you would go to training maybe once, twice, 3 times a week, depending on how serious you were with this training. And your coach, if you had a coach who was any good, they would look at how you played on the weekend and where you thrived and failed, and really tried to pinpoint what you needed to work on. So for example, and let's use AFL football for an example. If your kicking and was like kicking for goal was spot on, but your hand passing sucked, when you got to training, you would not work so much on your kicking for goal. You would work on the hand passing drills. So it makes sense. Work on your weaknesses And that is the way you get stronger. You would work on running and fitness and all that. And all these different aspects of the training session really help to make you a better player. And that's what we're looking for. The same rules apply with drumming. So my practice session looked like this. I had two sections. I had my training, and then I had my free time experimentation and learning songs and doing all that stuff. So in my first training session part, I broke that into 3 groups. The first group was hands. Now in hands, that really means anything to do with your rudimental kind of hand practice, whether it be 3 basic rudiments, double strokes, single strokes, paradiddles, flams, accent control, stuff like that. Anything where you were just playing on a snare drum, that is where you want to put your hand practice. And as an example, let's look at if I had 1 hour on a total to practice. My first half of that hour would be in my training session. I would do my hands for 10 minutes. The next section I've got is kit. So in kit practice, I would play anything that involves me moving around a kit. So like doing like hand and foot combinations, so linear patterns or fills or independence exercises and stuff like that. That would fall under kit exercises. And I would do that for 10 minutes. And the last section of my first part, the training part, would be groove. That would be anything, any kind of grooves I was working on, whether it be 8th note grooves or linear grooves or some David Garibaldi stuff. Whatever I was working on would fall into there, and I would do 10 minutes on those. So after I'd finished my training section of my practice, I would then move on to my free time where I would get to do drum solos, I would learn songs, or I would just experiment and see what I could come up with. And that was like the dessert. That's what I'm aiming for. And that's where I would have the most fun. I would have then been nice and warm from doing all my practice, and a lot of the stuff, ideas and that I had would come a lot easier given that I'd already done all these exercises and got my muscles going and did all that. Everything just happened a lot better and a lot easier, and I sounded better. Now, an interesting thing to note is that if you neglect one of those 2 parts of your practice session, you're going to run into some strife. I had a student who came to me for years it was fantastic. He was a great kid. He's a man now, but he was a great kid, and he practiced everything I gave to him. He rocked up every week and had made some progress. And I'll never forget this because it still blows my mind to today. But I remember one day he'd been playing with me for 4 years or something, and we just worked on all this technical stuff, and he'd had great hands. His technique was really good, and he was really good. And I said to him, "Hey man, all right, cool. Now I want you to just play me a solo." And he looked at me funny, like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, like when you're mucking around at home and you just, mucking around, just like a solo. Now this kid's just deadpan looked at me like, "Well, what are you talking about?" I was like, when you just muck around. He goes, "I don't do that." I was like, "What do you mean you don't do that?" And he's like, "No, I just don't do that." And I was dumbfounded, and I couldn't believe this. And I'm scratching my head and my face and everything, just like, "What do you mean you don't do that?" Like for me, whenever I sat down at the kit, if I made a mistake, next thing I knew I'd done a drum solo for 10 minutes and I had to try and reel myself back in and get on to focus. And he's like, "No, I just don't do that." And I was like, "Well, what do you practice when you go home?" And he said, "Just what you give me." I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. I just could not fathom that someone had done that. But it made me realize that not everyone works the same way. Some people are really comfortable in reading stuff, and if we've got it presented, they're going to really thrive. And then some other people are just like, "Nah, man, I just want to learn visually," and they really struggle with the first part. So having that balance is going to make a massive difference in your playing, because it's going to force you out of your comfort zone of where you think you should be, and it's going to open you up to different possibilities. So for this student, he was very comfortable in the first section, but when it came to second section, he wasn't very comfortable. And unfortunately, the only way to get comfortable with something is to do it. And I guarantee you, when you sit down at the drum kit and you start playing and you haven't got much practice experience or playing experience, it's going to sound terrible. It is. And when you practice something that you should be practicing, it's going to sound terrible. It's going to be hard. It's meant to be. This is the thing a lot of people don't understand. When you sit down and practice, it should sound terrible. If it sounds great, you're practicing the wrong thing. and you're wasting your time. So don't be scared to make mistakes. When you're in your own little practice safety space, no one can hear you, no one's paying attention. It's fine, go for it. See what works. Like sometimes you just have to see what sticks. But if you avoid doing that because you don't want to sound bad, you are really not going to make any progress whatsoever. And the same goes in the opposite, where if you are so scared of reading because you can't do it, well, if you stay away from it, you're never going to get good at it. So start with something you can handle. And remember, count out loud, take it slow, and go slow enough that you know what's going on. And the fourth thing you should really do is use a freaking metronome. Seriously, use a metronome. I'm not even lying. Use a metronome. That is going to be one of the best pieces of advice I can give you. So again, you've got your two sections. In the first section, we've got hands, kit, groove. Then after that, you would practice drum solos, playing with music, and just experimenting and seeing what happens with stuff maybe that you were practicing before. See how you can apply it, just muck around and try and be creative in some way. Each section helps the other, and if you just do one, you're missing part of that big picture and you're really going to struggle. So honestly, ask yourself, when you're practicing, are you doing that? Are you in column A, where you're just doing what the written stuff is, or are you just trying to jam with songs and do solos and all that? If you're not working on both together, then it's not going to be a holistic approach and you're not going to get the most out of your playing. Another really important aspect of practice, which a lot of people overlook, is to keep a log of what you're practicing. And for an example, when you are working on your 3 basic rudiments, let's say your single stroke roll, you've practiced your single stroke roll 5 minutes on right hand start with a metronome at 60 beats per minute. Write that down in a book. Then you know how long you did your double stroke for and your paradiddle. The next day you might want to do them again, but left hand start, following day, same thing. And just keep note of the tempo. If you look back over a week or 2 weeks and that tempo hasn't changed at all, ask yourself, well, why hasn't it changed? Am I pushing myself enough? And always try and push that click up if you are comfortable. You have to be your own police, and that is the only way you're gonna really progress. But on the flip side, don't be rushing through the tempos thinking that, oh, I've clocked it because I can play it at 100 beats per minute. If it sounds all wonky and messy and muddy and your sticks aren't coming to the same height and you're not locked in with the click, there is no point in speeding up. Make sure when you do speed up, everything is feeling good and sounds right. Which brings me to my next point, and that is to record yourself practicing. We're very fortunate now to live in a time where it's super easy to record yourself practicing. Most people have a smart device like an iPhone or an iPad or something like that. It doesn't have to be a great recording, and you don't need to record the whole practice session. Just when you're practicing something and you're working on it, the last time you're going to practice it or you're going to play it, just set your phone or something on selfie mode, just facing you on a music stand or something. Play what you're playing and then move on. In a month's time, when you come back and you look at that, you can literally see the difference in what you're doing, because the idea there is if you hear yourself playing it every day, just like looking at yourself in the mirror every day, you are not going to see massive changes in your weight and stuff like that over a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or anything like that. If you've got a friend that hasn't seen you in 3 weeks, they're going to notice a change in your weight. So they might say, hey man, you've lost a lot of weight. And you're like, oh really? No, I don't think so. Because you don't see that. You've got that every single day looking at that. Whereas if you look at a photo of yourself from a year ago and you go, damn, man, I've lost a lot of weight, or wow, I've really chunked it on. You can see a massive difference there. So it's the same thing for when you are practicing. When you've got that video a month apart, you will see a massive difference, and it is a great incentive, and it will help propel you and motivate you to practice. Now, please note that the example that I gave of 1 hour of practice, that's totally up to you. You can fit this into whatever amount of time you want. In fact, you could fit the first portion of your practice into an hour and then fit half an hour for the other stuff. It's up to you. That second section is really unlimited, and it doesn't matter how long you go for, but the first section, making sure you go through all that stuff first and then making sure you do the second part after that is where you're going to notice the most difference. So a typical practice session for one of my students will be broken into a half an hour segment where they've got 10 minutes on their hands, where they would do maybe 3 minutes on each rudiment, which leaves them roughly a minute of mucking around in between. Then in the second section, they've got kit exercises. We might be working on some fills, and they say they've got 8 fills to do. Okay, I would say do 5 a day for 2 minutes each, and after 2 minutes, move on to the next one. Then in the groove section, same deal. They might have 24 beats that we're working on in that groove section. I would then say do 5 a day for 2 minutes each. The first day, do the first 5. The next day, start from number 6 and go down, and keep going like that. And the second time around, go through and maybe spend more time on the ones where you didn't really do that well the first time through. A couple of things going to happen when you practice like that. After 2 minutes, whether you've got it down or not, move on. The idea here is you're not trying to really perfect each of those grooves. You're trying to just get used to reading it and doing all that stuff. So even if you struggle with number 1 and move on to number 2, by the time you get to number 3 and 4, you're probably going to find, especially if you're doing it slow enough, that they are actually getting easier, because 9 times out of 10, those grooves don't go up in order of difficulty. They're just different. So you need to make sure that you are not trying to perfect each one before moving on to the next one. By doing this method, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, keep coming around, the next time you come around, more than likely you will be able to nail the one that you couldn't do before, just because you've practiced other things in those other grooves that might open you up and make you a little bit more susceptible to getting it right. And do remember that the way you play these grooves today is going to sound much different 20 years from now. If I go back and play those same grooves now, they sound much better now than they did then. And it's not because I kept working on those same grooves. I've just learned a heck of a lot of other stuff over the years that has helped hone my skill and made those sound better. So all you're looking for before moving on is making them sound good and then moving on. If you follow this practice method of taking stuff from this pile and putting it onto this pile all the time and making sure that when you are practicing, it's not really sounding fantastic every single time. And when it does, you move on to the next thing, then your pile of stuff you can do is going to get much bigger, much quicker. And that is a well-rounded practice routine. So thanks for watching this video. If you did like this lesson, please hit that little thumbs up. It goes a long way in helping me grow my channel. And if you are not already a subscriber, please subscribe and hit the little bell to be notified of future lessons. I'll be back next week with another lesson for you folks. So until then, have a fantastic week and happy practicing.